So, have you ever been in a bookstore, picked up two different Bibles, and noticed one is just thicker than the other? It's a great question, and it actually points to this really fascinating historical mystery, one that's been around for centuries. So yeah, let's dive right in and figure out what's going on here.
And this is it. This is the central question we're going to tackle. Why does a Catholic Old Testament have more books than a Protestant one? It seems like a simple question, but trust me, the answer is anything but. We're talking ancient translations, debates that lasted for centuries, and even a huge turning point in world history. It's a wild ride. Okay, so let's just look at the raw numbers. The Protestant Old Testament, 39 books. The Catholic Old Testament, 46. And what's really important to get right off the bat is that their New Testaments are exactly the same. So the whole mystery, everything we're talking about today, it's all happening right here in the Old Testament.
So that's a difference of 7 whole books. Plus, you've got these extra sections added into the books of Esther and Daniel. And we're not talking about a few extra verses here and there. No way. These are entire stories, whole chunks of wisdom literature. It's a pretty significant difference. All right, so let's name names. Here they are: Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, Baruch, and 1st and 2nd Maccabees. These are the books at the very heart of this whole thing. Now, you'll hear them called the Apocrypha by Protestants or the Deuterocanonical books by Catholics. But whatever you call them, they include everything from epic historical accounts in Maccabees to stories and wisdom literature. So the big question is, where did they even come from?
To really get to the bottom of this, we have to travel back in time. We need to set a baseline. So, what did the Bible actually look like back in the 1st century during the time of Jesus and the apostles?
And this is our crucial starting point. The historical evidence is pretty darn clear on this. The Bible that Jesus and the apostles used was the Hebrew Bible. And guess what? It contained the very same 39 books that you'll find in a Protestant Old Testament today. That was their Bible, their established canon.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. We've got evidence from the time. This quote is from Josephus, a major Jewish historian who was writing right around 90 AD. He says, "We have but 22 books which are justly accredited." Now you might be thinking, wait, 22? I thought you said 39. Well, it's the exact same content, just grouped differently. For example, they'd combine books like 1st and 2nd Kings into one. So, same stuff, different table of contents.
Okay, and this next point, it's a huge piece of the puzzle. Think about it. The New Testament is just packed with hundreds of quotes from the Old Testament. Jesus and the apostles are constantly referring back to the Hebrew Scriptures. But here's the kicker. They never, not once, quote any of these extra books as if they are Scripture. They never say it is written and then quote from Tobit or Maccabees. And that silence, well, it speaks volumes.
Okay, so if these books weren't part of the original Hebrew Bible, how on earth did they end up in some Bibles today? Well, that brings us to our first big clue, and it has everything to do with a super influential Greek translation. So here's how it all went down. Step 1. Way back around 250 BC, the Hebrew Bible gets translated into Greek. This version is called the Septuagint. Step 2. Over the next few centuries, as people are making copies, they start adding other popular Jewish writings into the mix, kind of like adding bonus tracks to an album. But, and this is important, the Jewish folks back in Israel didn't see these bonus tracks as actual scripture. Step 3. The early Christians, most of whom spoke Greek, started using the Septuagint, and by doing that, they basically inherited these deluxe edition collections with the extra books already mixed in. And, as you can probably guess, this whole situation created a bit of a problem. It led to a lot of confusion and disagreement. For hundreds of years, the early church was totally divided on what to do with these extra books. This was not a settled issue, not by a long shot.
The debate really centered on this idea of the canon. That might sound like a fancy word, but all it means is the official, authoritative list of books that are considered divinely inspired scripture. It's basically the answer to the question, okay, what actually belongs in the Bible?
And just look at this division. You've got absolute giants of the early church on both sides of the fence. In one corner, you have guys like Jerome. This is the man who translated the entire Bible into Latin for the Western world, and Athanasius, and they're saying, nope, these books are not scripture. But in the other corner, you have equally massive figures like Augustine of Hippo who argued that, yeah, they're valuable and should be in there. This just goes to show you this was a real, legitimate, long-running debate.
So, if the early church couldn't agree, when did someone finally make a decision? When was the debate officially settled?
Well, this brings us to the climax of our story, the moment that would lock in the contents of the Bible for hundreds of millions of people forever. Okay, this timeline is where it gets really interesting. Just look at these dates. You have the ministry of Jesus around 30 AD. Sure, you've got some local councils in North Africa talking about it around the year 400, but the final official binding decision for the entire Catholic Church, that doesn't happen until the year 1546 at the Council of Trent. That's almost 1,500 years after Jesus walked the earth. Let that sink in for a moment.
That date, 1546, is everything. You have to ask, why then? Why wait a millennium and a half to make it official? What was so special about the mid-1500s that suddenly forced their hand to make such a final, definitive declaration?
Well, the answer, in a word, is the Protestant Reformation. The Council of Trent was the Catholic Church's big formal response to all the challenges being raised by reformers like Martin Luther. And one of Luther's big arguments was that the Church should go back to the original 39-book Hebrew canon. And here's the absolute heart of the matter. The Protestant reformers weren't just questioning the books themselves, they were questioning specific Catholic doctrines that were supported by those books. Things like praying for the dead, or the idea of purgatory, which finds support in a book like 2 Maccabees, or salvation through giving to the poor, which is in Tobit. So by making these books officially scripture at Trent, the Catholic Church was basically shoring up the biblical foundation for the very doctrines that were under attack. It was a defensive move.
All right. We've gone through a ton of history here, so let's pull it all together. Let's create a clear, simple summary that gives you that airtight answer to our original question. Here's the whole case in a nutshell.
So here's why the Protestant canon excludes these books. First, they stick to the Bible that Jesus and the apostles used and quoted as scripture. Second, the ancient Jewish community, who were the original guardians of these texts, never accepted them as scripture. Third, some argue these books contain historical and theological errors that conflict with the rest of the Bible. Fourth, a lot of major early church fathers rejected them. And finally, the official decision to include them didn't come from the Catholic Church until 1546, and it was made right in the middle of a huge theological battle.
And this table just lays it all out crystal clear. If you ask a few simple historical questions, was it quoted by Jesus and the apostles? Was it accepted by the ancient Jews? Was it written by a prophet? You start to see a really clear line in the sand. The 39 books of the Hebrew canon get a yes across the board. The Apocrypha, not so much. It's a pretty stark contrast when you see it like this.
And that really brings us full circle. This isn't just some dusty old historical debate, is it? A decision finalized more than 450 years ago in the heat of a major religious conflict still has massive implications today. It directly shapes the contents of the Bible, the most influential book in human history, for literally billions of people. It defines faith, it shapes identity, and it's a powerful reminder of how history is never really in the past.